401, so why don't we start? Because we've got...
I don't have the roll call list because Sonia does that.
Oh, okay. Well,
I didn't want to bypass that today.
I think we can just sort of go around and say our names.
Note who's here.
It's actually a good idea because Noah then can meet everybody.
That's true. Yep.
Okay, so are we ready?
Yep.
Everyone. It is a beautiful day outside for the first time in a really long time, and so I assure you that we will be efficient with our time today. Appreciate everyone being here as always. We are really honored today and excited to be welcoming a brand new member of the Audit Committee, brand new community advisor, Noah McVeigh. So I think we should go around and do quick introductions by way of both roll call and also reminding Noah who we are, and then maybe we'll end on you, Noah, and you can just remind us, say a few words about yourself just to remind all of us since your interview. So Nia, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Nia Vang, and I've been tasked with staffing the audit committee. I've been fortunate to work with a very thoughtful committee. They have lots of great ideas, and I'm happy to carry forward their ideas. So.
I'm Jeremy Lostetter, a community advisor, and welcome, Noah.
Matt Pobratsky, interim Ward 4 City Council member, him. Glad to have you.
Rebecca Naker, St. Paul City Council member, Ward 2.
James Farnsworth, community advisor, Ward 1.
And I'm Noah McVeigh, and I just want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to serve with you over the coming years, months and years. And my background is in public administration and governmental accounting, and I'm a licensed substitute teacher in the Twin Cities Metro. And so that's what I bring to our discussions. I'm really looking forward to seeing where we can improve city operations and hopefully improve public service delivery, which is the whole point of what we're here for. So,
Great.
And then we have Stephanie
And
online.
yes, so,
Hi,
Sonia, go ahead.
My name is Sonia, and I am the new Polly.
Day of firsts.
Yes.
Yeah, Sonia will be staffing our committee going forward, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to be passing out really quickly
Sure.
these attachments.
Thank you. And then Ms. Dilworth is online, but we can't see her
Yet.
yet. There we go.
All right.
Thanks.
We can see you. We could see you.
We could see her for just a
We
second.
have been able to see you. I think you need to maybe start speaking, Stephanie, and then we'll, yeah, there we go. Oh, but we can't hear you.
Let me check. Yeah, I think Stephanie.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yay,
Can
yeah,
you-
we can hear you.
Okay. I don't use Teams very often, so I have to relearn it every time I use it. This is Stephanie Dilworth, and I'm a community advisor, Ward 1.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Dilworth. All right, so our only, can I have one? Oh, thank you. No, it's all good. Just before we dive right into the agenda, I want to report that Dr. Britt was able to present to the City Council the report of the last audit. I'll defer to Mr. Pravratsky to add his thoughts, but it seemed to me like it was really well received. She took some time, just like she did with us, to go through the story map, which I think people were really interested in. It occurs to me now, Nia, we should probably follow up, and if we haven't done so already, just make sure we email everyone the report and the link to the story map so they can look into it themselves. But people had really good questions and comments, and one of the comments actually that I don't think any of us had talked about was that perhaps Dr. Britt should also present this report to the CIB committee itself, because they would be a good audience for her recommendations. And so we're following up to get that scheduled, and when it is, whether it's at a formal CIB committee meeting or a special meeting, we're not yet sure, but we'll let everyone know in case members of this committee want to attend. I think it'd be really interesting to see that report presented directly to the committee and see what discussion ensues. So that was helpful. And then, yeah.
Can I share that I'm in the process of scheduling a meeting with the Wilder Research Team, our Office of Technology team, and Office of Finance to talk about transferring the data over so the city will be in control of maintaining, updating going forward. The question for us is that OFS may not have the capacity to deal with the data itself, so we may really be using OTC services for that assistance. And so I'm scheduling that meeting, and then with regards to the CIB meeting, as soon as I cement that down, we're looking at a July meeting, because that's the meeting that was indicated to me that's because it's a regular CIB meeting. So that would be a Monday, July 14, and it's going to be held at Rondo. Or if the 14 doesn't work, then it may be August 11th. So if any one of you are able to attend either of those two dates, let me know, and then I will mark it for invitation.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Ms. Vang. Mr. Pravratsky, did you want to add any of your thoughts from the presentation?
Yeah, I think the tone that I got from our colleagues was similar to how we as the audit committee received it, which was just appreciating all the collaboration that goes into a successful audit, but also especially that, the mapping, the website, they had as much wowing at that as we did, and appreciation. And I think especially the piece Nia spoke to of it being data and information that could be transferred and then continue to be utilized or manipulated. I personally found that to be one of the most valuable pieces, and it seemed like our colleagues did too, just for the fact of anytime there's the handoff point, there can be a sort of, that's the time it's valuable, and then all of a sudden it isn't. And so something that can be more durable into the future where we could add another year's data to it or add something else to it or do something else. So I think a lot of the times we see the surface level piece, but we're not in control of the thing. And so as council members, and so I think that part was particularly useful, and I agree. And the OTC side doesn't surprise me too much because I'm sure it is very technical. And if I tried to describe why I think it's technical, I'm sure I would be ill-equipped. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. So just wanted to sort of close the loop on that and let folks know that our last audit has been successfully reported on, filed, and is complete, which brings us to the next topic on our agenda, which is to select our next topic. And I will be the first to admit that I think the topic selection process has been a bit clunky, maybe is the right word. It feels like we haven't quite gotten into like a routine of how we choose topics. In part, that's because prior to having Wilder on retainer, it always seemed like it took just as much time to find the new consultant as it did to identify the new topic. Now that we have someone who's just regular, I think that the topic selection process probably could be routinized a bit. And one of the things that I'm hoping we can move towards is having our audits be more aligned with the interests of the city council, because we are a committee of the council. So kind of rather than having the audit committee off over here doing audits of things that we think are important and that the council has sort of signed off on through a resolution, it would be, I think, great to have more interaction with the council as we choose a topic, saying, for example, these are the things we're interested in, but also hearing what is the council interested in, so that there's a little bit more interest and buy-in on the part of the council into what we're doing. I would say, and again, Mr. Pravatsky, feel free to disagree, but it seems to me that we have a council that's really interested in critical thinking and analysis, and is often coming up with things that we should study. And as it happens, we have a committee that can study those things. And so just want to be efficient about using this committee as the tool that it's intended to be for things that the council already wants to study, rather than kind of, again, off on its own. So with all of that said, my proposal today was that I don't know if folks have had the time, but hopefully people have had the time to review the ideas that have been presented in the past in large form in front of us. Thank you, Nia. And then also in smaller form from not just our discussions in the past, but also from the internal staff survey and the external community survey going back as long as we've had them going. And have your own ideas as to what you think would be a good next topic and your own reasons as to why. And my hope was that we could talk about those ideas here and come to a list of hopefully no more than 5 or so that we could then present to the City Council at their next policy committee meeting next Wednesday, June 25th, and get their input. And they may have totally different ideas. They may love one of the ones that we present and just want to go with that, but then be able to come back at our July meeting and say, okay, based on this input and our ideas and the council's ideas, this is how we want to move forward. So that's my thought, and that's what I was thinking we could do during our discussion, but I'm open to other people's ideas since again, this process is still very much in flux, I think. Mr. Lasta.
Oh, Chair Naker, if I may, I love the idea of our work being more aligned with the council and what they would like to see us do. And I'm wondering even if, would there be opportunities they could leverage audit results in their decision-making, things like that. If there's big topics that they know there'll be decisions, that those would be items for audit, something to think about. But yeah, I think that's a good idea, and as a piece of the city council, the audit committee can help serve that purpose. Makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, to the extent that it's something that we need to know more about this in order to make a decision to do something else. That I think is the perfect fit. Mr. Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Naker. To your point, and I agree with that in terms of it feels right for this committee to be aligned with what the council is thinking. Under the committee 2025 committee discussion on the topic tracker, I think this must have come from a previous time we were having this conversation, which I think was on the eve of the council's retreat or some sort of retreat that the council was having. And so I'm wondering, where it says re-promoting topic survey, interested in hearing about topics that might come up at the retreat, if there was anything that either of you could add from that retreat or any other venue since we last had this conversation that might be of interest to our topic conversation today.
Thanks, Mr. Farnsworth. That's a great question, and it's causing us to have to reach all the way back to February to remember.
Oh, it was okay. That was a long time ago.
No,
fair enough.
That's okay. Well, but
or even, I guess, the recent
or the budget retreat.
I don't think in scanning, there's nothing that pops into my mind from the recent budget retreat that is necessarily a clean audit committee fit, but that might just be the way I'm remembering it and mostly remembering Because I think the financial challenges paint the color of sort of everything the council is considering right now. Not financial challenges, just the tightness of the national, state, and like local financial opportunity. So I think that in general could be seen as sort of audit focus, but I don't know that there was anything explicit other than just a general, everyone's going to have to be lean, so every department is going to have to propose trims, which means everything will be under scrutiny. But I might be wrong. Council President Naker might remember more.
I don't remember much more. The only two things that come to mind, one was from our strategic planning retreat in February. We did talk about the desire to do a study of our rent stabilization ordinance. Actually, this was in our budget cycle last year. We budgeted $100,000 for a housing study, which was really to study how the rent stabilization ordinance is working for both tenants and landlords, and not with an aim to make massive amendments necessarily, but more operational changes, staffing changes, maybe slight tweaks to the ordinance itself, but just to see how is it going after we've had rent stabilization in place for, 4 years. That was one. And then we have recently talked about, and it's sometimes finding a fit that is a good audit fit is difficult, because when we're just exploring big picture ideas, that doesn't always seem like auditing something that we're already doing. But we did have a conversation about Como Zoo and its finances and the fact that it does not break even, and it has become kind of more and more reliant on the general fund rather than holding its own in its own special fund. And so there's, I think, some studying needing to be done about how could that operation become more revenue neutral or positive. Those are two things that I remember.
And I think, well, and for additional context on the rent stabilization study, that, as Council President Naker mentioned, that is funded, and so a version of that will happen this year, or at least to my understanding. For whatever it's worth, in looking through, I'm looking at the 2024 packet that Sonia just handed out. I think, not shockingly, anytime you're asking people what we should audit, it can veer into almost like an airing of grievances, because that's sort of an adjacent emotion to to what we're talking about. So I'm not shocked, but it is a little, that is a lot of the trend. I personally actually think a combination of 8 and 44 is kind of interesting. 44 is about hiring St. Paul residents for St. Paul jobs, and then 8 is an audit on the amount of turnover and the costs related to turnover. I think in particular, some of the things in this list that read like symptoms, I think could be more closely related to a causal thing like turnover, or turnover could be a symptom too. But I think, for example, like pressures about manager pay versus labor pay, or labor relations, or employee treatment, or employee pay. I think all of that, even when that shows up as a single line item, could be more appropriately grouped as like a turnover challenge in general. So I do kind of like and to be honest with you, I will just anecdotally state, there are a lot of strong staff that I knew during my time as an aide who either left then or have left since. And I have anecdotal ideas about why that might be, but it's nowhere near comprehensive or objective or systemic. And I don't mind the idea of the St. Paul residency piece, because I think people might not fully appreciate the complexity of trying to prioritize that. Like, I instinctually agree with something like that. I think it would be great if we can incentivize, our employees to either live in St. Paul or to hire folks who live in St. Paul. But I think it's actually much more complex than people appreciate, trying to set goals like that or funding based on that. But I see it as a part of sort of the retention or turnover piece, or it could be related. But those two seemed, other than, I know Council President Naker would always love to talk Skyways, and so that one's on there too. But I don't know that there's anything incredibly interesting or new we would learn from that. I could be wrong. Yeah, just for my 2 cents.
Thanks, Mr. Profetsky. Well, we've sort of started diving in, which is great. I think that's a great segue. So I hope that answered your question to some extent, Mr. Farnsworth. And then, I think I'd like to open it up and just hear people's thoughts on what do you think we should audit? And doesn't have to be something that's in any of these documents. It can be something that you, as a city employee, as a community advisor, just think or have heard about from others in the community. But I think the goal would be to get, again, kind of a brainstormed list going. And depending on how many ideas we have, we may need to whittle it down a little bit. But we'd love to hear people's thoughts.
If I may,
Mr. McVeigh.
Thank you. In an ideal world, the audit committee doesn't have the staff to do this, of course, but we would be probably doing an enterprise risk assessment for the city, and we would have that documented, because having risk, when we have risk documented, we can actually understand what sort of circumstances or events or activities are really kind of material to the operations of the city as a municipality, and what potential threats those may be coming up within a given calendar year. I mean, it's widely used in the world of performance audit, but I mean, it's not required. I mean, government auditing standards doesn't require it, but it's kind of an industry best practice. And I would just be curious to know if there's any information out there from the that the city has, any one of the departments has prepared, or even maybe somewhere within the city council where we have some of those risks documented. Because I remember, was this last week or 2 weeks ago maybe, there was a matter regarding compliance with the Data Practices Act. And I think that was one of the topics that was brought up in here from the city clerk. And that's something that could be a commonplace issue in multiple departments if we're not actually abiding by the terms of the Data Practices Act. It's very simple stuff like that, and that's a significant risk because it just undermines the governance processes that we have here at City Hall. And so that's, when we are making our topic selection, I will gladly yield to the other community advisors and to the council, because ultimately we are here to facilitate you in your oversight of city departments. I feel that's rightfully where we are supposed to be. We're your agent to do that and to facilitate that process. But I do think we need to be looking at risk whenever we can when making topic selection, just because of certain topics are going to be relevant to risks that affect the city. And there's a multitude of risks that just are floating out there right now, even including with the current situation with even federal and state level with categorical aids and just the city's financial picture, since it's reliant on intergovernmental transfers between the states and the feds. And so I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm going to end on that.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up, Mr. McVeigh, because it is a critical part of the process that I completely forgot to say anything about, and that we've talked about quite a bit in the past when we've selected our topics. Ms. Dilworth and Mr. Lostetter created and trained us in on different kinds of risk. I can't remember how many months ago it was. And we do have a sort of risk evaluation rubric that we use. We don't have anything close to an enterprise risk management assessment, not that I know of. And so what we've sort of done instead of that is to pool together these ideas, usually apply the risk assessment to them to see how they would rank in these different categories of risk, and then use all of that together to make our decision. So it's sort of an after-the-fact assessment of risk, rather than, since we don't have that on the front end, which is not the right way to do it. I completely agree with you, but it is definitely a step in the process, and it's one I completely forgot to mention. So I appreciate you.
Someday down the line, we can something to work towards, perhaps.
100%. We can audit our own lack of having an enterprise risk management. This could be turned on its inside of itself so much. Thank you. Mr. Lostetter, did you have a...
Yeah, I was going to say I could share my
Yep.
list. So I have, I think the ask was to have your top 3, and so I chose 2 that were on the lists that we have, and 1 that I didn't see on there. But one kind of was mentioned about the hiring process and turnover, and you can use turnover to see how well our hiring process is working, and just wondering would it look at the efficiency of the hiring process? Is it consistent across city departments? Is it compliant with all of the requirements? And yeah, how is it doing as far as attrition? And is there a goal to hire St. Paul residents in city positions, et cetera? The second one was about data requests. So to Noah's point about the Data Practices Act, it does seem like there is an increase in data requests. I believe the city is, we can probably verify this as part of the audit, looking at, are we getting a higher volume of data requests? Are more resources and city time being used to respond to them? And is there a need to change the process to make it more efficient and responsive to these increasing number of requests? And then finally, the new one that's not mentioned on here, or it may, but I didn't see it, was about sidewalks. And I also thought skyways, about how is maintenance prioritized for sidewalks? Are they ADA compliant? Is it meeting those requirements? How are decisions to build new ones made? Is it equitable to different areas? Is there thoughts about which ones are snow cleared in the winter? I don't know how much, if I suppose if it's a city property, the city is doing that, but most of it is private. And is that working well? I just think, sidewalks, skyways are so important for mobility of our citizens, quality of life, connectivity to places in the community, restaurants, your work, seeing people. So that was my other thought.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Losteder.
Yeah.
That is really helpful. And I have a number of thoughts on those, but I'm going to hold back.
Yeah.
Others. Mr. Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Baker. I'll just say that a few that stood out to me, primarily from this topic tracking spreadsheet. Again, that several folks have touched on, the compliance with the Data Practices Act, given recent events, and that we've been talking about this topic for a while. The submission by the deputy mayor, I think, continues to be relevant. And then I see, just admittedly, sitting down right before this meeting, the most recent suggestion we received from a resident, it looks like on June 4th, 2025, around Right Track, the Right Track program. Being familiar with the Right Track program myself, just from the outside, and admiring it a lot and what it does for youth workforce in the city of St. Paul, and has a large impact. I just thinking about our risk assessment and what partnerships exist in the structure of a workforce program like that. I'm certainly seeing that there could be some risk there inherent there, and would be curious to see what the Right Track folks would think about that. Because of course, as we've talked about in the past, want the audit committee to be working in partnership with whatever party would be subject to the topic. So again, just seeing that for the first time this meeting, that piqued my interest. And then the previous committee discussion topic around district councils, that I think Council Vice President Kim had spoken to previously as well. I think there's a lot of risk within the district council system. I know there had been a staff transition in terms of the I don't know the position title offhand anymore, but the city liaison to the district councils. So I know we've talked about in our risk modeling in the past, a transition can often be a good time to look at that. I know it's a topic that's been looked at in the past, maybe not necessarily from this lens, but there's been a variety of studies on district councils, and I think it continues to, for a number of reasons, be a topic that would be worth our time looking at. And then I certainly don't disagree with other topics that we've talked about so far. I think we're in a good spot where there's a lot of possibilities that we
We're not
could.
gonna run out.
No, right, that we could go towards. So, not necessarily the top three order, but those are things that stuck out to me in preparing for this conversation. And then based on your earlier answer, the Como Zoo is actually really intriguing to me. And now I'm interested in learning more about municipal zoos or all that stuff, because I had really honestly not even really thought about that before. But now thinking about it, since you mentioned it, I certainly think there's a lot there in terms of risk and it being a concrete topic that we could look at. So thank you.
One thing I've learned since the presentation is that there are very few municipal zoos that are free.
Interesting.
Very few. All right. Ms. Dilworth, go ahead.
Hi, I was looking at some of the things we had talked about in the past, I guess, and I was curious about the chief budget officer and that person being hired, and then would we look at the things we had talked about before, because we had a whole lot of discussion about the joint powers agreement, and we put that on hold. The district council is another one. So I guess I'm kind of in terms of the risk factor, looking at some of the financial risk, though I think the ADA compliance that was brought up is something that also carries a high risk for the city. So I would be more inclined to look at the chief, the fees, and then the contract, and then the sidewalks and their compliance.
Great. Okay. Yes. Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you. I would say too, I would also add my support for the Data Practices Act. I think people would be absolutely astounded at the scale of not just the number of requests, but how much an individual request might require. I used to walk into like a city staff person's office when they were working to fulfill a request and literally have paper waist high on every single wall in the room. And it was a single request from a single individual from one point in time. And that was like weeks and weeks of compiling, scrubbing, synthesizing, sharing of like that. Even if it's not physically printed, that's the visual to have in your head of an individual request at an individual point in time. So I think, and I would also note too that the fact that I believe our city clerk has, not just Deputy Mayor Tincher, but I believe our city clerk has previously mentioned that as well. So I would just, because I didn't speak to it in my first one, I would echo strong support for that being a topic.
Can I ask a question, Chair Naker?
Yeah, of course.
So I get the frustration because, of course, the University of Minnesota gets hit with data compliance, or not get hit with it, but they get requests all the time. So I guess my question, when we talk about it from a risk standpoint, is the risk the time that the person has to take? Is it that we're trying to change the Data Practice Act? What would, if we put that on a risk scale, what would that look like, I guess? Because it's not a in time, there's a so there's a time element, there's a financial element in terms of maybe the documents that they have to pull, but what does that really look like when we look at other things for risk? I guess I would just challenge the committee to think about.
Well, I'll take one shot at it, and that's a good way to question the topic. I appreciate asking it in that way. I would say it's a combination of the things you said. So I think on one level, there's an incredible amount of time spent across basically every single department gets hit with apologies for reusing that phrasing, but is required to spend a tremendous amount of time because requests can either be based on an individual department or enterprise-wide or focused on the city council or focused on the mayor or whatever, but every department. So yeah, the time and money is, if not a risk, just something that impacts city operation. I think people wouldn't appreciate how much And I fully understand the need, for transparency and fully support the need for transparency. But I don't think people would appreciate that actual city services are impacted in the need to fulfill the requirements of this. So time and money, and then how that impacts actual resources. But also the fact that the way, I believe the reason, for example, our city clerk would have this on here, as well as the deputy mayor, is that then the process by which they're fulfilled has to be designed and structured. And I think because there are changes or staff turnover or changes in how the state is implementing the statewide rules, for example, I think those over time mean that you're sort of building the thing as it goes, and then the system isn't perfectly centralized. Or I believe our city clerk actually plays like the central role in processing these, and then it flows out. And so, for example, is it traditional in a city this size for that one individual woman to have to do, that kind of thing? So the staff time, how it's structured, and then obviously, the recent case does mean there's some legal risk in the way, just because it's, I don't want to blow anyone's mind, but no one's doing a data request like out of the, just for fun. There's usually a reason. So just as someone who's had to be the subject of many, many, many data requests.
Yeah, but I
So
agree.
is it the process we're looking at then? Is that what, is it the process? Because I don't think they're going to go away. So
Right.
that's what I'm trying to
Right.
understand.
Yeah, I
You know,
think
because we'd need to, for Wilder, for sure, we need to narrow it way, way down as to what that looks like. Because, yeah.
I think it would be process.
Yeah.
To put it short in a short answer.
Mr. Prentice.
Well, thanks, Chair Nakert. Just to get at the risk question, I believe in several of these, and then just in other reporting, there's a compliance question, right? And that's the risk.
Yep.
I think that gets at the heart of the risk. Is compliance was mentioned in both of these submissions. So that's what I would say as well to that.
Well, and I would just personally say, like, only for myself, the group may not agree with this. We're talking a lot about risk in terms of the reason to study this, but I would actually really appreciate the cost and scope and impact of this to just be more visibilized as well. Like, I think I have a decent understanding of how and how big and how much this happens just from having to be in City Hall. But even I could not possibly tell you like what the comprehensive amount of like hours, staff hours spent on this would be, like if we added it up across the city. And I think knowing the scope of that is helpful just for people to have an appreciation of this is what it means when, blah, blah, blah. So I care about the risk and managing the risk and reducing the risk, but I also think part of our function as an audit committee is helping to visibilize sort of how the city operates and how it could be improved. So I think even knowing the scope and the scale in and of itself, aside from the risk, is actually really valuable.
Yeah, I appreciate what's been said in the question, because I think the risk of doing this particular topic is that it could easily become sort of whiny, for lack of a better word. And I think you're right, Ms. Dilworth, that the Data Practices Act isn't going anywhere, and as much pain as it is to us to fulfill it, the public has a right to know. That's the reason for it, and that's the nature of the work we do. So I would be interested from I think making it visible is sort of a byproduct of doing this, but I would be interested in it more from first of all, are we complying? Because sometimes I hear we're not, and see we're not. And what is the workload to the end of how could we do it more efficiently? Not, look how much work this is for us. Please stop making these data requests, because to your point, Mr. Pravotsky, people making data requests are not really super motivated by how much work it is for us to not make their data requests. That might make them more likely to make their data requests. So, yeah, I think that's a really important angle of it to point out. I think we've heard, well, has anyone not, and Mr. McVeigh, I know you said you'd defer to us, but I really encourage you not to do that, because your voice is, while new, just as valid as ours, and if there are things that jumped out at you or from the community.
I don't say I would differ, Chair Necker. It's, how I put it this way, I think there's a lot of value in terms of looking at the Data Practices Act, how the city is complying with state statute, and how the program itself, the records management, and how complying with data practices requests, that they are structured generally, because there's certain parameters set out in state law, right? But in practice, there's going to be internal policies and decisions that are going to guide how actors are actually complying with that law. And so I wouldn't say I'm necessarily opposed or in any sense, because I just think that something like the Data Practices Act is very important, and just because from the perspective of open government and encouraging public trust, because I think the folks on the city council and the folks that work, the 3,000 plus people that work for the city, by and large, are wonderful people, and they're very committed to public service, and that being able to go in and actually look at how we're managing our records and complying with the Data Practices Act is demonstrative of our commitment to being transparent with the public, and also looking at where we can make improvements to the program itself. And Stephanie, I actually also would concur with you in what was presented to the Budget Committee regarding fee recovery as well. And so I'm not strong, I don't have a strong opinion, because I feel my role here is to facilitate, because ultimately it's going to come to the council to decide whatever is recommended to them. And so on that note, I just want to make sure that we are looking at things that generate value, right? That we're able to strengthen internal controls and improve operational efficiency and effectiveness, because that's the point of why we're here. So on that note, I will stop yapping.
Well, that's great. Well, let me throw my three into the mix, and then we have to decide how to decide. So I also put data practices asks, both because we've talked about it before. Also, I thought it was interesting that this came both from the administration and the council side. So we've talked a lot about the importance of buy-in and interest, and that's rare that we have something that both sides are interested in. I also put and I was loath to do this a little bit, but the housing study that we started with a previous consultant that did not go anywhere, which was supposed to basically study the process from the time that a housing development is proposed until construction. Concept to construction, all the different steps they have to go through, how much time it takes working with PED and DSI, and how we could streamline that. That study didn't go anywhere, largely due to the consultant, but it's still a need, and building more housing is definitely still a priority, especially in this difficult climate of financing construction. So to me, it seems especially relevant that we not create barriers on the city side by being difficult to work with or cumbersome, since there's enough other barriers on the outside. And I think that was something that was still really interesting to our planning and economic development team and our director Newton. It was just that she couldn't get things going with the consultant. So there was already some natural buy-in there. And then finally, this was not on any of our lists. We haven't talked about it before, I don't think, but our Neighborhood Star grant process came up this year. We went to the legislature to try to get some changes to statute to allow us more flexibility in how our Neighborhood Star process works. The reason for that was because, again, coming from Director Newton, it's become clear that it is a very time-intensive process to make these grants to neighborhood businesses, organizations. She has said that it takes a lot of her economic development team's time just to administer this one program. And obviously there's a lot of other things that we need to be doing in terms of economic development that aren't just one grant program. So the changes didn't pass in the legislature, so it still mandates exactly how big the board has to be and et cetera. But that's actually kind of separate from the nature of the program itself and how and whether it's working as intended and how much time it's taking. So I put that out there as well as the risk there is just the opportunity cost of staff time that is being diverted to this program.
Council President Naker, I'm really glad you mentioned the housing piece, the sort of from start to finish, what is the process, what could be improved. You know, we're not the only city in the world where buildings have to go through a process. I continually, you know, one of my silly things I repeat all the time is like, anytime we think we're the first city to deal with something, it's just so, there's so many times where we like act like we're the first city that's had to build a bike trail or like develop housing or whatever. And it's like every city in the world does this. We don't need to invent a new way to do this. There are best practices. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. I think that the Data Practices Act and employee retention and turnover would be my personal top 3 for whatever it's worth
Okay.
of all of the scope.
Why don't we do, okay, here's my suggestion. First of all, has everyone shared their ideas? Are there any other ideas that have not been put on the table that people would like to put on the table?
I have one more. And
Please.
Actually, I kind of am interested in Como Zoo because that's an enterprise fund. So ideally, it would be self-sustaining. And so, but that's just that's my nerdy side of speaking a little bit. But
The audit committee is not at all nerdy, so you are in the wrong place. Just kidding.
But most municipal zoos, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, they do charge fees to users to actually visit and use that space, that facility. And so, not that necessarily that's a policy decision that was made by the council some time ago. And so, maybe that would want to be the council may want to look at that perhaps as part of that kind of a topic. Just the funding structure, but it'd be important to make sure that it doesn't in any way affect the accreditation for Como Zoo, because there are standards that the AZA prescribes for all public zoos in the United States. So that's a little bit, I digress though, so.
Thanks, Mr. McVeigh. I appreciate that. And yes, actually, it was interesting when we were talking about that. We were talking about the possibility of charging for non-residents versus residents of the city, since 85% of those who visit the zoo don't live in St. Paul. 84%, actually, I think it's down slightly. And apparently, because it is a regional park, it is not allowed. We are not allowed to charge different amounts for residents, non-residents. But that led, of course, to the next question, which is, what's the benefit of it being a regional park, given that that's one of the constraints that it places on us? That's a significant downside. What are the benefits? So there's more to explore there for sure. But any other ideas that haven't been mentioned yet that people want to put on the table? Doesn't look like it. Okay. My suggestion is that Ms. Vang read the ideas that we've said,
Sure.
if you have them.
I've been keeping a laundry list.
Or
I
Ms.
may
Romero.
miss some,
Okay.
But I did combine all the kind of HR-related stuff, like employee retention, turnover, equity regarding salary and pay rate, difference
Yep.
between that.
Okay, before you, sorry, don't read them yet. But before you start reading them, so you'll read the list and then listen and think about what your top 5 would be, because I think the goal would be to have 5 that we recommend. And then when Ms. Vang is done, we will hear everyone's top 5, and then I think we should be able to get to the ones that we are going to recommend. Does that?
Just to be clear, the eventual decision is to choose one, right?
Yes. And the
Okay.
thinking was that we could bring 5 to the council who could weigh in.
My only 2 cents would be, all due respect to myself and the full council, I think providing 5, if we're only choosing one, is actually too wide of a scope. I would say, I don't know if 2 or 3 or whatever, but I think 5 is almost telling them that whatever goes, telling us. So I would I would suggest a smaller list.
Okay.
For whatever it's worth.
3, 2, 3, 4,
I would suggest 2.
2,
2.
3?
3. Okay. Well, and given that the council can have their own ideas, maybe 2.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, with all respect to the council, but likes choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you're listening, think about your top 2. Okay.
Okay. So as I said earlier, I'm combining all the HR-related stuff, and I will repeat myself. Employee retention, turnover, kind of equity regarding pay rate and salary between frontline supervisors, staffing. And then the second one is data practices, compliance, and then we can develop more scope on that. The third that we're revisiting is the housing study with regards to development and the process regarding constructions from timeline, from beginning to when it gets implemented. And then the other one's Neighborhood Star Grant, and then fee recovery, joint powers agreement, the Right Track program, and then the district council. Did I miss anything else?
I think we had Como Zoo.
Oh, Como Zoo. Okay,
Is there anything people said?
that's all I had. Let's see.
Okay. All right. Do people have their two? Okay.
Well, and then we had the sidewalks.
Oh, and sidewalks.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Sidewalk, skyway, sideways.
For whatever it's worth, most of the sidewalk questions, I think I anecdotally know, and I have in my brain like a sidewalk presentation from a long time ago that's definitely outdated but exists. So just for whatever it's worth, because I'm the biggest sidewalk nerd on planet Earth, so I uniquely always have it up here. But every single question you raised I care about, but I think theoretically the answers exist, even if I don't agree with the answer.
Okay. Okay.
And I believe Jeremy had indicated with regards to the sidewalk, sideways, skyways, has to deal with ADA compliance. So, okay. I apologize, I missed that one.
And
Thanks,
snow
Stephanie.
clearance and equity of where new ones go. Okay.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 topics.
Okay. All right. I think we should just go around and say our top two.
Okay.
Who wants to start?
If we have to do 2 instead of 3, I would choose the data practices and the housing and development process. And it's a tight break, but I would drop the HR retention and would be just below those 2 for me. So top 2 would be data practices, housing development process.
Okay.
Okay.
Want to go next, Mr.
I can go
Since
next.
everyone's looking at you for some reason.
They're actually the same ones, the housing study and data practices.
Ms. Dilworth?
I was the housing studies and the district councils.
Mr. McVeigh?
Data Practices Act and probably the housing study as well.
The Data Practices Act and district councils.
And I was data practices and hiring process and turnover. Sad little solo me. Okay, so that looks like it's data practices and housing process as the 2 top vote getters. However, I think we should keep all 10 of these, keep a list of all 10 of these, because that's going to be our, that should be the basis of our next list to come back to. And I think what we should do between now and the council meeting is try to put both the housing process and the data practices asked through that risk assessment rubric that we have, and then present both that and the idea when we present it to the council, so it's not independent of that. Does that sound like a plan to folks? Okay.
So I just want to confirm, data practices and housing development process are the 2 topics that we're forwarding to the council to vote on a final study. And in the meantime, I'm going to put together those 2 topic ideas under a risk assessment, apply that rubric to it.
Yeah, and I think depending on, we're not talking about a ton of time between now and a week from tomorrow.
I may need to flush out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to do a rough job and send that around maybe to the rest of us to give input on, I think people here would be happy to help, flesh out what the different.
I'm going to try my best because I'm off Thursday and Friday. I apologize.
No, we're all off on Thursday, and that makes a lot of sense. So we'll do our best. Okay, and then I think we'll also open it up to the council for other ideas. So just in case that these are not, these don't get chosen, there may be other ideas that come out too. Great. Okay. Last but not least, community engagement update. Mr. Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Naker. Very briefly, the committee has continued to do community engagement. There's kind of 2 administrative rescheduling items we need to work through with 2 districts, District 7 and District 10. And the District 10 one was for tomorrow, but we'll work on those internally, so expect communication about that. District 7 is Frogtown Neighborhood Association, District 10 is Como. And then just saying again, for the record, as I always do, that the committee continues to be available for engagement opportunities, and please reach out via the Audit Committee website if you're interested in setting something up.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, Mr. Farnsworth, as always. Anything else to come before us? It looks like we are at the end of our agenda, and we are at perfect timing. Mr. Farnsworth.
Sorry, Chair Naker. I meant to ask this earlier, but I know there was, back in May, there was conversation about evaluating Wilder, and I guess I never heard, so I'm assuming that we have moved forward with renewing Wilder's contract.
Ms. Vang.
I'm working with the City Attorney's Office and Welder to review and amend our existing contract to extend it for an additional 2 years, or maybe I think 3 years that we had originally agreed.
And that was following, I think, an ask to all of us for our evaluation and feedback, and if anyone had concerns.
Believe, if I'm honest, we only received 1 feedback.
And it was resoundingly positive, is my assumption. Otherwise, we wouldn't be renewing the contract.
So based on that, I took it as a majority response to move forward with Wilder.
Great. All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Night.